a colleague of mine who, this was how she studied Talmud, said, you have to call up and you have to give them your credit card to pay for this. And, I gave them my name and my credit card, and she said, is this a problem? I said, no problem. And and she said, for a long time I thought, this was my secret, this was my, little private intervention into this male culture, until she sort of mentioned it to somebody in passing. She said, oh, we all do it. And that there was this whole sort of subculture of women, in Orthodox communities, privately engaging through the telephone and the privacy and the intimacy of the telephone in Talmud study in ways that were sort of unprecedented. And then we get the digital text of the shop. CD-ROM, and then online, and so on and so forth, that were sort of the more recent conversation. And within just the last 15 or so years, the changes have been, quite striking to see in this one area. And to me, this is exemplary of a cascade of new media of the past century have become part of living in the modern world. So responding to new technologies, rethinking the role of older media in relation to new technology, this is now part of life. Basically, since the early 19th century, not a decade has gone by without the arrival of at least one new communications technology, sometimes more than one, and with what feels like an accelerating pace of new technologies. So somebody earlier was saying, like, there's always something new, it's always changing, and that is now part of living, for anybody living in contemporary, technologically advanced societies, that's a given. Always wondering, if I, purchase this, how quickly does it become out of date? What's going to be the next iteration in the version? If I had records, then I got cassette tapes, then I got CDs, now I have MP3 files. It's just like, I keep buying the same music over and over again. What next? And that's in one person's lifetime. And this is part of everybody's life. And this has a special significance in religious communities, where how one communicates, in what language, in what time and place, by whom, with whom, involving what materials, can be as important as it is communicated. It has a special urgency and has a special sense of the possible and of the appropriate that makes how religious communities deal with this ongoing cascade, to me, of a special interest. And my latest book looks at a sort of key encounters that American Jews have had with new media in their religious life over the past century, starting at the beginning of the 20th century with the impact of sound recordings and then other media, but primarily sound recordings on Chazonis, which is just remarkable how that music and that profession has been transformed by this medium, and ending with looking at how Lubavitcher Hasidim do outreach on the internet, with points in between and media in between. And from my research and from my teaching, my work with the working group on Jews, Media, and Religion meets at NYU Center for Religion and Media, certain key issues have emerged for me that I would like to share with you, some of the larger questions. One, to begin with, is the importance of casting the net wide. The field of religion and media is a relatively new field, both for the media scholars and for the religion scholars, who basically have looked askance at one another until fairly recently. It's even newer in Jewish studies, and so this calls for attention by scholars and also by educators to consider the full range of Jewish engagements with communications technologies, and to explore the implications they have for Jewish life generally, and then for educators, specifically within the field of Jewish education. And so this, I think, means not only looking at educational media, but also at the media that's related to Jewish life, broadly defined as presenting opportunities for teaching and for expanding, for your own sense of what might constitute Jewish educational possibilities in terms of the use of new technologies. Not necessarily what is already designated as of pedagogical value, but often repurposing some of these new media as opportunities to teach lessons quite apart from what they might have been intended to. And I'll give some examples along the way. The relationship of new media, old media. This is an ongoing issue in Jewish life. The relationship of the oral to the written word, of the written to the printed word. These are old and still ongoing issues of concern in Jewish scholarship. And a thing to think about with new media, sort of broadly defined, is that new media is a moment of an encounter. It's this moment when people assess the possibilities of this new technology, and they also reassess their use of existing technologies. And so it's not only saying, iPad, what am I going to do with it, but how does it affect the media that I already use, that I'm already familiar with, or the media that I've already cast off because they have become obsolescent. And one of the things I find interesting that we now live with, they're often characterized in extremes that are polar, either utopian or just either the greatest, they're going to transform the world. It's heal the evils of the world, and we're going to enter sort of messianic age, or we're going to go to hell in a handcart. And there's very little in between, which is where the responses actually happen to new technologies. They don't completely transform for good or for ill society, but they do have an impact in relation to the practices we already have. So the recent discussions of how the internet changes everything, very interesting to watch these conversations as they were unfolding over the past couple of decades, because they are very similar to discussions about the personal computer shortly before that. That will change everything, about television, about radio, about motion pictures, and always this divergent response that this was transformative for great good or an unprecedented danger. And I think we have to watch out for those conversations, but also realize those conversations are actually something to look at in and of themselves, because in these conversations we begin to understand what's at stake for people when a new medium comes along. Media so are a subject of interest in themselves, only a means of conveying content, and so calling one's own attention, but also one's students' attention to this is, I think, there's great value in having students think about, the impact that has in work, my work with Holocaust educators, for example, where the different ways one can access the way a survivor story. In some cases, you have survivors who have written books, who have videotape testimonies, who appear in documentary films, and who are still around, and you can invite them to come speak to your school. So you can have the live experience, the documentary experience, the testimony experience, the written experience. And sometimes they will tell the same story, but the context, the medium in which they're told, and how it shapes the way of telling is of significance in and of itself, and that's the kind of thing I think one certainly the teacher should be aware of, and often I think can bring to the attention of students. And there's a history of engagement with media that can be repurposed, even media that are originally thought of as my favorite example is the klezmer resurgence or revival that happened in the mid-1970s was driven by the encounter of musicians, young musicians, with old 78 RPM recordings of klezmer music made in the first half of the 20th century. And they would listen to these recordings, and they would try and recreate what they were hearing on the recordings. And it's only then, after they had started in doing that and performing, that they discovered that some of the artists who made those recordings were still alive, and that you could study with them. And Henry Sapoznik, who's one of the leading figures in this movement, tells a story about his band is Capelli is just getting going, and they're playing at some old age home in Brooklyn, and some guy comes up and says, "I recognize that tune. That's a Dave Harris tune." And he said, "Yeah, that's right." He said, "Did you ever know Dave Harris?" He said, "Well, he's in the next room playing pinochle."